My husband had the nerve to strike my face repeatedly over a trivial matter. The next morning, when he woke up and saw a massive feast on the dining table, he arrogantly said, "You finally realize your mistake." I just smiled. But when he looked out the window and saw the fleet of cars parked outside our house, my husband panicked in absolute terror. He thought I would just stay quiet, but I had prepared a very special gift for him. My husband nearly passed out when the truth hit him. Before the story begins, please let us know in the comments where you are reading this from. Don't forget to like and subscribe so this channel can grow and bring you even more captivating stories. That night felt more stifling than usual. The breeze that typically slipped through the window cracks seemed reluctant to blow, leaving the air stagnant and heavy on the lungs. In the living room, Isabella stood completely still beside the ironing board. Her hands deftly folded one of her husband's expensive dress shirts. She tried to smooth out every part of the collar and sleeves so no creases were left behind. This chore had become her mandatory nightly routine. However, the exhaustion that had piled up all day made her attention to detail slip slightly. Without realizing it, the inner tip of the collar folded slightly in the wrong direction as she placed it on top of the stack of neatly pressed clothes. Heavy footsteps approached rapidly from the front door. Peter had just gotten home from work. His face was hard, his jaw clenched tight, and his eyes radiated an exhaustion mixed with extraordinary irritation. He always brought every problem he faced at his corporate job back home, using the house as his primary dumping ground for all the pressure he felt. Peter tossed his leather briefcase carelessly onto the long sofa and walked straight toward the stack of clothes his wife had just finished. He pulled the top shirt roughly. His eyes immediately narrowed sharply when he noticed the tiny, irregular crease on the collar. Isabella, who was still holding the handle of the hot iron, turned her head slowly. She could feel a powerful wave of anger radiating from the man standing before her. Peter turned around and closed the distance between them with wide strides. Suddenly, a harsh slap landed squarely on Isabella's left cheek without the slightest warning. The sound of the slap cracked like a whip, shattering the silence of the night and echoing throughout the house. Isabella's body lurched violently to the side. Her hair fell into her face, and her collar became disheveled. A hot, stinging sensation spread rapidly across her skin. This kind of brutal behavior was not a new occurrence. Peter raised his hand far too often over trivial things that didn't go his way. A dinner that lacked seasoning, a floor that hadn't been vacuumed perfectly, or even the way Isabella responded to his words could trigger his rage. On any normal day, Isabella would immediately burst into tears, begging for forgiveness repeatedly with a trembling voice promising to fix all her mistakes. She would always bow her head in fear, feeling she deserved the punishment just to keep her marriage intact. However, tonight a massive shift occurred. Something broke permanently deep within Isabella's soul. An invisible boundary had been crossed. Isabella didn't cry at all. Her eyes remained bone dry. She slowly righted her posture to stand tall again, smoothed her clothes, and lifted her face with absolute confidence. She stared straight through Peter's eyes. Her gaze was flat and chillingly calm. It was so unnervingly calm that it felt entirely unnatural in the midst of this violent situation. The absolute silence Isabella intentionally created made Peter feel even more furious and humiliated. He felt his ultimate authority was being openly challenged. He hated seeing his wife silent and refusing to whimper for mercy. For Peter, Isabella's fear and tears were the source of satisfaction that validated his position as the absolute ruler of the household. "You dare look at me like that!" Peter barked, the veins in his neck bulging, his voice trembling with rage. His anger hijacked his reasoning completely. He raised his right hand high again, curling his fingers into a tight fist, preparing to deliver a much harder follow-up blow to break his wife's stubbornness. Isabella didn't flinch or step back to avoid it. She didn't even raise her hands to protect her face or head. She just stood firm like a rock, letting her husband feel in control for a fleeting moment. With a very flat voice and low volume, yet sharp enough to slice through the room's silence, Isabella finally spoke. "Go ahead, Peter. Do it." Hearing those words spoken with such sheer audacity, Peter was stunned for a split second. In all their years of marriage, he had never once heard such a freezing tone from Isabella's mouth. But his pride and ego refused to back down. The raised hand swung down at full speed, striking the side of Isabella's face for the second time. The blow was delivered with far more force than before, causing Isabella to lose her balance and crash hard against the hardwood floor. The metallic taste of thick liquid began to spread in her mouth. The corner of her lip was badly split. Even though the pain shot all the way to the nerves in her head, Isabella locked her jaw tight so not a single whimper escaped. She simply closed her eyes. In the darkness behind her eyelids, her mind worked systematically and with terrifying speed. She began to calculate carefully. One by one, she mentally catalogued this physical pain. She tallied every strike, every curse, noting that Peter's debt had exceeded its maximum limit and would very soon have to be paid in full without mercy. The night rolled on, crawling slowly toward the early hours of the morning. Peter had long since fallen into a deep sleep, on their king-sized bed, his snores echoing through the gap under the door. The man slept soundly, as if his body carried no burden of guilt whatsoever. It was as if the brutal assault he had just committed hours earlier was just a regular bedtime routine that required no remorse. At the same time, Isabella remained wide awake. She sat with her legs stretched out on the living room floor, her back resting against the cold drywall. Every joint in her body throbbed with pain. But the physical suffering meant nothing compared to the absolute clarity now dominating her mind. Her decision was final and irrevocable. The extraordinary patience she had maintained for years, hoping her husband would change, had vanished without a trace. Isabella stood up slowly but surely. She walked steadily to the bathroom, turned on the faucet, and splashed cold water on her face repeatedly to wash away the blood and grime from the corner of her mouth. She stood still, staring at her own reflection in the bathroom mirror. Her face bore the undeniable marks of abuse, but her eyes radiated an unbreakable steel resolve. She lowered her gaze to her left ring finger. Her diamond wedding band wrapped tightly around it. That piece of metal was originally supposed to be a symbol of loyalty and their sacred vows. But to Isabella tonight, that ring was no more valuable than the iron shackles that had tortured her soul. With a firm, unhesitating movement, Isabella forcefully pulled the ring off her finger. She turned and walked straight to the garbage disposal in the kitchen sink. She dropped the ring in, letting it fall freely from her grasp before flipping the switch. The loud, grinding, metallic screech echoed sharply as the ring was mangled along with useless food scraps. At the exact second that ring was destroyed, her spiritual bond and submission to Peter were permanently severed. Isabella no longer considered herself the legal wife of the cruel, ungrateful man sleeping soundly in the bedroom. The wall clock pointed exactly to 4 a.m. Isabella realized her body refused to rest. She washed her hands with soap until they were spotless, then walked over to open the double doors of her massive stainless steel refrigerator. Her hands began moving a massive amount of ingredients onto the kitchen island. She pulled out a thick, premium standing rib roast, fresh vegetables, a side of salmon, and a complete array of spices and herbs. Isabella arranged and organized the raw ingredients methodically. Once everything was ready, she walked to the knife block and pulled out the heaviest, sharpest chef's cleaver she owned. The knife had a significant weight to it and an incredibly sharp edge. Isabella's right hand began to move with extreme agility and power. She sliced the thick meat with rhythmic, measured strikes. The loud thud of the blade hitting the wooden cutting board broke the eerie silence of the house. Every slice of meat became a conduit for venting her emotions. She then minced garlic, crushed peppercorns, and heated large skillets on the gas range. Isabella cooked at a blistering pace, as if she were preparing a grand banquet for very important guests. All the repressed disgust, the piled-up vengeance, and the years of inner suffering were poured entirely into every movement of her hands as she sautéed and seared. The savory aroma of rich gravy roasting beef and sharp herbs quickly spread to every corner of the house, overpowering the chilly morning air slowly enveloping the neighborhood. By 6 a.m., her kitchen marathon was flawlessly completed. Isabella began transferring and arranging the elaborate dishes onto the dining table in an impressive formation. There was a large platter of perfectly crusted roast beef, herb-grilled salmon, creamy mashed potatoes, glazed carrots, and an array of rich side dishes covering almost the entire surface of the mahogany table. Hot steam still rose thinly from the feast. Finished serving the food, Isabella walked back to the sink to clean the large cleaver she had used relentlessly. She scrubbed and wiped both sides of the blade until it was spotless, and its surface reflected her image. She raised the knife to eye level, staring intently at her own reflection. A faint smile slowly formed on her bruised face, creating an expression that radiated high-level danger. A fitting farewell feast, Isabella whispered softly, yet laden with absolute certainty. Her voice was terrifyingly calm. The initial sign of a massive, destructive storm, about to sweep away the life of a man who always thought he was immune to any legal or moral consequences in this marriage. Isabella lowered her hand and placed the sharp knife back into its block. She meticulously smoothed her clothes, then walked calmly to pull out one of the dining chairs. She sat up straight, folding her hands in her lap, displaying an attitude of patient waiting. She waited for her husband to wake from his dreams, ready to officially open the horrific show that would tear the entire foundation of his arrogance down to the ground. The morning sun began to slowly pierce through the gaps in the partially closed bedroom blinds. Peter stretched lazily on the mattress, spreading his arms wide to relieve the stiffness in his back. After a long, deep sleep, he opened his eyes slowly, immediately greeted by a twisting hunger in his stomach. The air in the bedroom was suddenly filled with the incredibly strong, mouth-watering aroma of home cooking. The smell of roasted beef and savory gravy made Peter eager to get out of bed. He threw off the covers and stood up. He rubbed his face with his palms, feeling not even a fraction of guilt for his cruel actions the night before. What raged in his chest was an overwhelming sense of victory. He firmly believed that the physical discipline he had administered had yielded maximum results, successfully forcing his wife into submission. Waking up at the crack of dawn to prepare top-tier service to win back his heart. With wide strides and a chest puffed out with false pride, Peter walked out of his bedroom toward the dining area. He carelessly combed his messy hair with his fingers. When he finally reached the dining room, his eyes widened at the sight before him. The dining table, which on normal days only held simple eggs and toast, was now practically groaning under the weight of an extravagant feast. Thin steam rose from the platters of hot food, consistently spreading the rich aromas that made Peter's stomach roar. Right at the end of the table, Isabella sat perfectly still with a deadpan expression as if she had been waiting for her husband's arrival for a long time. Peter immediately pulled up a chair and sat heavily with peak arrogance. He stared at the incredible array of food with eyes gleaming with immense satisfaction. Without wasting a second, he grabbed a large empty plate, piled a massive mound of mashed potatoes, and began transferring thick slices of roast beef directly onto it. But Peter didn't immediately take a bite. Instead, he paused and focused his gaze on his wife's face. He flashed a blatantly condescending smile. Peter felt that all control in this household rested entirely in his hands. He felt incredibly smart, thinking that physical pressure was the only language his wife understood to ensure absolute obedience. "So you finally realize your mistake," Peter said, his voice raised and dripping with disgusting arrogance. His hand then moved to shove the richly seasoned meat into his mouth, chewing greedily. "This is how you should have behaved since the day we got married. A wife's duty is to be obedient and submissive to her husband. If you consistently served me with this standard every day, I wouldn't have to waste my energy educating you the hard way." Isabella gave absolutely no verbal response to her husband's degrading words. She didn't even touch the silverware or taste a single bite of the feast laid out before her. Her gaze was lack dead ahead, staring blankly at the plate Peter was using. Isabella's calm and silent demeanor actually made Peter feel a bit awkward and uneasy for a moment. But the arrogant man quickly brushed the feeling aside and chose to ignore it. He continued his luxurious breakfast at a ravenous pace. In his narrow mind, Isabella's silence was interpreted as absolute fear and total surrender. Peter grabbed a large glass filled with water and chugged it until it was empty. He wiped his mouth roughly with the back of his hand. Having devoured the massive portion of food, Peter felt completely stuffed, his satisfaction reaching its peak. He stood up from his chair slowly, intending to walk over to the large front bay window to take in the morning view of their suburban street. He strolled casually, feeling that today was going to go exactly according to his beautiful plans. He had no idea his position at work was currently hanging by a thread. He reached out and pulled back the thick curtains covering the large window facing the street. The extraordinary sight that morning finally unfolded, clearly striking his retinas. Peter's hand froze midair. His eyes bulged to their absolute maximum limit while his breath caught in his throat as if he were being violently choked. Out on the asphalt street in front of his house, which was usually dead quiet, save for a neighbor's passing sedan, was a long convoy of massive, pitch-black luxury vehicles. There were more than 5 heavily armored Cadillac Escalades and Chevy Suburbans parked tightly in an intimidating formation. Their glossy black exteriors reflected the morning sun blindingly. Every window was tinted pitch black, making it impossible to see who was inside. The massive size and aggressive design of the motorcade were concrete proof that whoever owned them was no ordinary person. Fleets like this were usually only deployed to escort corporate titans, top government officials, or elite billionaires, with limitless economic power. Peter's heart rate skyrocketed in seconds. He tried to swallow, but his throat had suddenly turned as dry as a desert. All the confidence and arrogance he had proudly flaunted at the dining table just minutes ago vanished without a trace, instantly replaced by a panic attack that squeezed his heart. A gripping fear crawled down his spine, making his toes turn ice cold. His brain was forced into overdrive, trying to unravel the mystery and guess the identity of these uninvited guests who dared show up with such a massive show of force. Was there a motorcade for a high-ranking politician that took a wrong turn? Or did this have something to do with unresolved internal issues at his corporate firm? Peter tried to convince himself there was no logical reason for a convoy of that scale to be looking for him. He was painfully aware of his social status as merely a mid-level manager at a mid-sized company. With whatever strength he had left, he turned his neck toward the dining room, his face as pale as a corpse. Peter's lips trembled violently as he tried to gather the energy to speak. Cold sweat the size of corn kernels began to bead on his forehead and temples. Peter locked his eyes on Isabella, who was still sitting silently and calmly in her chair. His wife showed absolutely no surprise or confusion at the sight of the terrifying motorcade laying siege to their house. Whose cars are those? Peter asked, his voice hoarse and shaking violently, unable to control his own terror. His right index finger pointed toward the window, trembling uncontrollably. Panic had successfully hijacked every conscious function of his brain. Isabella slowly stood up from her seat, with incredibly calm movements, radiating sheer authority. She walked over to where Peter stood. There were no traces of fear left on her face from her husband's cruel actions last night. The aura surrounding Isabella right now felt absolutely freezing, making Peter feel intensely intimidated. Isabella stopped right beside her husband. She turned her face to look straight through the window glass, staring at the line of massive vehicles blocking all exits from their property. Slowly, the corners of Isabella's lips curled upward, forming a faint smile that promised absolute ruin for anyone standing against her. "The person who will make you regret you ever touched me. He's here," Isabella said, her volume low but echoing powerfully against Peter's eardrums. Every word that rolled off Isabella's lips was spoken with crisp articulation and heavy emphasis. They hit like a lethal curse, finally finding its exact target. Peter stumbled a step backward in shock, his back hitting the edge of a console table hard. His knees felt so weak they could barely support his own weight. He couldn't grasp the hidden meaning behind his wife's words. Who exactly was the VIP Isabella was talking about? How did a regular housewife like Isabella have access to the influential figure controlling that fleet? Hundreds of terrifying questions collided in Peter's mind, forcing him into the deepest abyss of confusion and dread. Throughout their marriage, Peter had firmly believed the lie that Isabella was an impoverished orphan with absolutely no family protection. Based on that false belief, Peter felt safe to act as tyrannically as he pleased. But at this exact second, that misleading belief was bulldozed to the ground by the terrifying reality unfolding before his eyes. Before Peter could put together the words to demand an explanation, a thunderous pounding echoed against their heavy front door. It didn't sound like a normal guest knocking. The knocks carried heavy weight, a firm rhythm, and signaled an authority that could not be denied. The sound echoed through every corner of the house, which magically felt like it was shrinking and threatening its occupant. Peter could only stand frozen in place. His motor functions seemed to experience temporary paralysis, making him unable to move an inch. His eyes were glued to the heavy wooden front door, which was still tightly shut. It was as if he were waiting for a pack of apex predators to kick it down and tear him to shreds. In stark contrast to her husband, who was paralyzed by sheer terror, Isabella walked toward the source of the knocking, with extraordinary calm. She took a moment to adjust her collar and smooth her clothes, ensuring she looked presentable and perfect to welcome her guest. The smile of satisfaction heavy with victory had not left her face. She then turned halfway, just to throw one last look at Peter, who was shivering violently in his fear. "Enjoy your payback," Isabella mouthed silently, letting Peter read her lips. After delivering her final warning, Isabella turned forward, twisted the deadbolt, and pulled the heavy door open completely. She stood tall, welcoming the guest of honor, who brought the absolute power to permanently end her husband's era of arrogance. The heavy oak front door swung open with a soft creak of the hinges. The chilly morning wind instantly rushed in, sweeping through the foyer, bringing with it an aura of tension so thick it was hard to breathe. Standing in the doorway was a tall, heavily built man with perfect posture. His face had sharp angles, radiating absolute authority and lethal threat all at once. The man wore an impeccably tailored custom suit that draped his frame, signaling a social class far above average. Behind him stood 6 massive bodyguards with expressionless faces, standing rigid, waiting for the command to destroy on behalf of their boss. Their presence instantly made the previously spacious house feel like a shrinking cage, trapping Peter in a terror he had never imagined. The tall man stepped into the house without asking for permission. Every step of his expensive leather shoes on the hardwood floor sounded heavy and full of certainty, creating echoes that felt like they were striking Peter's heart directly. Peter, still frozen near the dining table, felt the blood in his veins turn to ice. The stranger, who had just walked in, had eyes as sharp as an eagle's. He swept his gaze across the room with condescension before locking eyes directly onto Isabella. The man's initially rigid and cold expression suddenly faltered slightly. It was replaced by a look of deep pain and immense fury when he clearly saw the condition of Isabella's face. The man stopped right in front of her. He slowly raised his right hand, intending to touch the corner of Isabella's lip, which still bore the split and swelling from last night's brutal strike. But before his hand touched the wound, the man clenched his fingers into a fist so tight his knuckles turned white as if he were holding back the urge to demolish everything around him. His jaw locked, veins popping in his neck as he suppressed the explosion of emotion. He took a deep breath, trying to stabilize, a voice choked with rage. "I told you to come home a long time ago, yet you stubbornly stayed in this dump just to be treated like trash," the man said, his deep baritone voice vibrating heavily. Isabella only offered a faint smile, a smile so calm yet implying so much. She shook her head slowly, signaling that her era of suffering was truly over today. The brief, heavily implied conversation between the two people in front of him made Peter's brain operate in slow motion. He didn't understand what was happening at all. Who was this titan of a man, and why was he speaking with such an intimate, protective tone to his wife? The panic that had been squeezing his stomach now morphed into disorienting confusion. Peter tried to swallow, gathering whatever fake bravado he normally used to oppress those weaker than him. "Who the hell are you people? How dare you trespass in my house?" Peter shouted, his hoarse voice forced to be loud. His body was trembling violently, but he tried to square his shoulders to look like he held authority in his own domain. Hearing the shout, the broad-shouldered man turned around very slowly, directing his entirely lethal focus straight at Peter. His eyes no longer showed pain but pure, unadulterated ruthlessness ready to rip its prey apart. This man was Harrison, the ultimate CEO and apex predator of one of the largest corporate conglomerates in the country. And more importantly, he was the biological older brother of the woman Peter had just battered. Harrison didn't utter a single word in response. He merely gave a small gesture with his index finger. In less than 2 seconds, 2 massive bodyguards who had been standing by the door lunged forward, tackling Peter. Their speed and power were no match for Peter, who had absolutely zero martial arts skills. One guard kicked the back of Peter's knees hard, causing him to lose his balance and crash to his knees, slamming into the hardwood floor with a sickening thud. The other guard clamped down hard on Peter's shoulders, pinning him down so he couldn't get back up. A sharp pain shot from his knees up to his lower back, making Peter wince and shed tears of pure terror. Harrison took slow steps forward, approaching Peter, who was now at the absolute lowest position beneath his expensive shoes. "You dare ruin my little sister's face, and you still have the nerve to ask who we are." Harrison's voice boomed through every corner of the room, carrying the weight of a threat that crushed whatever sanity Peter had left. Peter's eyes bugged out. His throat felt choked, as if invisible hands were strangling his windpipe. He turned his head jerkily to look at Isabella, who was still standing elegantly where she had been. Sister Peter gasped, feeling the world flip his entire reality upside down. For years, he had lived with the idiotic assumption that his wife was a weak, poor woman with no relatives, someone he could treat however he pleased. The reality that his wife was the flesh and blood of the immensely powerful billionaire standing before him was the most horrifying nightmare he could never have imagined. Without giving Peter a chance to process his shock, Harrison raised his left hand and accepted a thick manila folder from the guard behind him. Harrison violently threw the folder full of documents right at Peter's chest. The folder burst open upon impact, scattering the officially stamped papers across the floor right in front of Peter's knees. With trembling hands and rapid breaths, Peter tried to read the sentences printed on the legal documents. His eyes scanned every paragraph as his panic skyrocketed. These weren't ordinary papers. They were official legal documents proving the hostile takeover and forced transfer of every single asset Peter owned, starting from the deed to the very house he was sitting in. The titles to his cars right down to the aggressive buyout of the majority shares of the mid-sized corporation Peter currently worked for. Harrison had bought everything overnight just to completely obliterate the source of Peter's arrogance at its roots. Everything Peter bragged about, all the material wealth that formed the basis of his arrogant attitude, had been stripped away without leaving him a single dime. Peter was now a nobody. He had been turned into the most worthless creature in the blink of an eye. The air in the room felt incredibly heavy and oppressive, making it hard for Peter to take a deep breath. His eyes were still glued to the legal documents scattered on the floor. His mind violently rejected the information he had just read. His logic scrambled for excuses, trying to believe this was all just a bluff or a cruel prank designed to scare him. Peter convinced himself it was impossible for the company he had worked at for over a decade to change hands overnight. He tried to look up, glancing wildly between Harrison and Isabella with eyes full of absolute despair. His mouth opened and closed several times without producing a sound, like a fish tossed onto dry land. He wanted to scream to deny the validity of the documents, but the fear strangling his vocal cords was too strong. This can't be real. You forged all these papers. My CEO would never sell the company to you. Peter's voice finally came out as a pathetic, hoarse whisper. He tried to offer one last line of defense with words that had absolutely zero backing. The very second he finished his denial, the smartphone in his pocket rang piercingly loud. The ringtone felt intrusive and jarring amidst the suffocating silence. Peter flinched. His hand frantically dug into his pocket, pulling out the sleek device. When the screen lit up, the name of his company's CEO flashed clearly. A sliver of false hope sparked in Peter's chest. He thought his boss was calling to give him an important assignment, or to tell him the company was fine, which would prove all of Harrison's threats were pure bullshit. With a wildly shaking index finger, Peter swiped the green button and pressed the phone to his ear. "Hello, sir. What do you need me for so early in the morning?" Peter greeted, trying to force a calm tone, seeking refuge in the man he considered the ultimate authority at his workplace. However, the response he got from the other end of the line was far from what he hoped for. Instead of the usual corporate greeting, a barrage of profanity and ear-piercing panicked screaming erupted. The CEO's voice sounded terrified, desperate, and overflowing with rage. The man on the phone screamed at the top of his lungs, cursing every breath Peter took. "You ungrateful son of a bitch. What catastrophic, monumental fuck-up did you do out there? You're fired effective immediately. No, not just fired. I am going to blackball your name in every industry, so you will never work a white-collar job anywhere ever again." The CEO's screams were so loud they could be heard clearly even without speakerphone. Peter froze. Every joint in his body felt disconnected. "Sir, what are you talking about? I didn't do anything wrong at the office. I always hit my quotas," Peter protested, his voice shaking, trying to defend his non-existent dignity. "Shut your damn mouth. The corporate parent company just pulled all our funding this morning and nuked every single contract we have. They said it's all because some low-level scumbag named Peter offended the honor of their core family. Because of your sheer stupidity, my company is vaporized. You just destroyed the livelihoods of hundreds of people, and you are going to pay for it." The call abruptly disconnected, leaving a long beep signaling the end of everything. Peter slowly lowered the phone, letting it slip through his fingers and clatter against the hardwood floor. The mental defenses he had built over years shattered into a million pieces in seconds. The bitter reality finally slapped him dead in the face. The giant of a man standing before him truly had obliterated his entire livelihood without even needing to lift a finger. Peter was no longer a respected, high-ranking corporate manager. He was now an unemployed, assetless pariah hated by an entire industry. Absolute panic took over Peter's body. He realized his only way out of this hell was to beg for mercy from the woman he had relentlessly abused all night. Peter broke free from the guard's grip. They had intentionally loosened their hold anyway. The man crawled forward pathetically across the floor, approaching Isabella's feet. His previously arrogant face was now drenched in tears of terror and uncontrollable snot. He reached out both hands, trying to grab the hem of Isabella's clothes to beg for pity. "Isabella, my sweet wife. I'm sorry I'm your husband. I love you so much. Please forgive me. I just lost my temper last night. I swear to God, I will never lay a hand on you again. Please talk to your brother. Save me, Bella." "We can still fix our marriage," Peter babbled in a sickeningly high-pitched whine, playing the victim of circumstance just to save his own skin. Isabella looked down, staring at the man groveling near her designer shoes. The emotion rising in her heart wasn't pity or mercy. It was a profound, overwhelming disgust. The man who always shouted about power and obedience was nothing more than a coward who would instantly crawl and beg when faced with a greater power. With a very calm movement yet full of strict rejection, Isabella took a step back, avoiding Peter's filthy hands. She waved at the air around her as if swatting away a disease-carrying rodent. "Give him 15 minutes to get off this property without taking a single item," Isabella commanded, her voice as cold as ice. Her eyes stared straight ahead, refusing to look at her husband's tear-streaked face anymore. Hearing his sister's direct order, Harrison immediately signaled with his hand. The massive bodyguards moved in unison. They were no longer gentle. Two men grabbed Peter by the arms, roughly lifting him completely off the floor. Peter thrashed and screamed Isabella's name. But his voice was just an empty echo that would never change a thing. The guards dragged Peter across the room out the front door and literally threw him with immense force, so he rolled across the driveway asphalt. Peter face-planted into the pavement, his clothes dirty and torn. The front door of the house that had been his kingdom for years slammed tightly shut right in front of his eyes, locking away his entire past life and leaving him alone to face a cruel world with absolutely nothing but the clothes on his back. Peter stumbled along the edge of the suburban road, his eyes blank and directionless. He never imagined that in less than an hour, the entire foundation of his life would be pulverized, leaving him with nothing but agonizing pain all over his body. His once crisp dress shirt was now stained with dirt and grime from being hurled onto the pavement by Harrison's guards. He felt as though every passing driver was staring at him with mockery and disgust, even though they were just strangers minding their own business. The hunger that had momentarily been suppressed by Isabella's extravagant breakfast now returned to claw at his stomach with a vengeance, accompanied by a thirst that choked his throat. Peter tried digging into his pockets, looking for spare change or a credit card that might have been left behind. But he found nothing but empty lint. All his financial access had been systematically and totally severed. In the midst of his peaking despair, one name popped into Peter's mind as a final glimmer of hope for survival. That name was Mia. Mia was the woman he used as an escape outside of his marriage to Isabella. For almost 2 years, Peter had blown massive amounts of his hard-earned money that rightfully belonged to Isabella, just to keep Mia happy. He bought her designer bags, fulfilled her every whim, and paid her a massive monthly allowance. Peter convinced himself that Mia was the only person who truly loved him and would stand by his side no matter what. He felt Mia owed him a massive debt of gratitude, making it perfectly logical to ask her for shelter and protection right now. With whatever strength remained in his trembling legs, Peter quickened his pace toward the upscale downtown luxury condo building where Mia lived. He didn't care about his disheveled appearance or the cynical glares from the doorman in the lobby. Peter just wanted to get to Mia's door, hug her, and tell her about the massive injustice he had just suffered. He imagined Mia would welcome him with tears of sympathy, give him clean clothes, and serve him a hot meal, while they plotted revenge against Isabella and her brother. That belief was the only reason Peter could still stand upright and keep walking. After a long, exhausting trek, Peter finally stood in front of Mia's condo door. He didn't knock. Instead, he reached into the hidden pocket of his wallet, which still held the spare key Mia had given him months ago. Peter slid the key into the lock, turned it with a heart full of hope, and pushed the door open slowly. He took a deep breath, trying to prepare the most pathetic words to win Mia's sympathy. But when the door opened fully and he stepped into the room, all the hope he had built instantly collapsed, replaced by a lethal shock. In the impeccably tidy, sweet-smelling living room, Peter did not see Mia waiting for him anxiously. Instead, he saw Isabella sitting perfectly calm on Mia's plush designer sofa. Isabella looked so elegant, as if this luxury condo was just another wing of her own palace. Standing beside her was Harrison, his arms crossed over his chest, glaring at Peter with an even colder stare than before. His wife's presence in his secret hideout was a devastating blow that left Peter speechless. He stood frozen in the doorway, his mouth hanging wide open, unable to produce a single sound. How could Isabella know about this place? How did she get here before him? Welcome, Peter. Looks like you were searching for a place to hide, Isabella said, her voice silky smooth yet carrying extraordinary sharpness. She sipped warm Earl Grey tea from an expensive ceramic cup, acting as if she were enjoying a relaxing afternoon break. Peter shifted his gaze to the corner of the room and saw Mia standing there, her face ghost white. Mia was gripping the handle of a large Rimowa suitcase packed to the brim with her clothes and valuables. Her eyes were swollen as if she had been crying for a very long time. Peter tried to step forward toward Mia, reaching his hand out to her. Mia, what's going on? Why are they here? Please explain this to me. We need to leave right now, Peter shouted, panic and confusion lacing his voice. But Mia quickly stepped backward, distancing herself from Peter's reach, as if he were a plague-carrying corpse. Mia shook her head repeatedly, her face filled with terror and absolute loathing. She no longer looked at Peter with the spoiled, adoring eyes she used to have. Don't come near me. Don't you ever touch me again, Mia shrieked. I want absolutely nothing to do with your dirty business. I had no idea you were such a monster of a husband and a fraud, Mia yelled at the top of her lungs. Isabella told me everything. She showed me the paper trails proving that all the money you gave me was embezzled illegally from your company. I am not going to federal prison because of your bullshit. Peter felt like he had been struck by lightning on a clear day. He turned to Isabella in disbelief. Bella, what did you do to Mia? Why did you destroy my only hope? Isabella set her teacup down on the coffee table with a very slow, deliberate motion. She stood up and walked closer to Peter. I didn't destroy your hope, Peter. I merely opened Mia's eyes to who the man she was so proud of really is. Did you think your secrets were safe? Did you think I didn't know about every single dollar you blew funding this woman's luxury lifestyle? You used corporate funds that belonged to the shareholders, and now that corporation belongs to my brother. So, technically, every single designer item in this apartment belongs to our family. Peter collapsed onto the cold hardwood floor, feeling as if the entire world had conspired to crush him. He watched as Mia unapologetically walked right past him, tossed her apartment key to one of Harrison's guards, and walked out the door without a single backward glance. Peter tried screaming Mia's name over and over, but the woman kept walking until she disappeared down the hallway. Now Peter was truly alone. He was trapped in a room with the wife he had oppressed and a brother-in-law who possessed the power to erase his existence in a heartbeat. A massive wave of terror blanketed his heart, far greater than when he was evicted from his own house that morning. A suffocating silence returned to the room after Mia left. Peter remained slumped on the floor, feeling completely drained of energy. He stared at the ground, unable to meet Isabella's relentless gaze. In his mind, Peter desperately searched for a loophole to escape or a way to flip the situation. But every path he imagined led straight to darkness. He realized Isabella had planned all of this meticulously long before he even threw his first punch last night. Everything felt like a massive, masterfully set trap, and he had stupidly walked right into the center of it without a shred of suspicion. Isabella slowly paced around Peter, her footsteps making no sound. She stopped right in front of him and crouched down so she was eye level with her husband. She took a deep breath and began speaking in a terrifyingly calm tone that carried crushing pressure. Every word felt like a sledgehammer to Peter's consciousness. You know, Peter, I've known about your corporate embezzlement for a long time. I have every single record of the illicit wire transfers you made to fund your high-roller lifestyle and your little mistress. You thought I was just a dumb, submissive housewife, spending all day in the kitchen. I was the one quietly feeding that information to internal auditors through third parties, Isabella said, a faint smirk appearing. Peter snapped his head up, his eyes bulging. So, all those massive investment losses I suffered over the last year, that was you. You made me lose my secret offshore accounts. Isabella nodded slowly, without a hint of hesitation. Exactly. I orchestrated it so my trusted associates would approach you with shady high-yield investment schemes that looked too good to pass up. You, being the greedy fool you are, swallowed the bait without doing any due diligence. The embezzled corporate money went straight into a black hole I created. And now not only is the money gone, but you owe a massive debt to some very unfriendly people. Peter felt his heart stop. He remembered the massive, off-the-books loans he took from private lenders to cover his investment margins. Those lenders were known mafia-affiliated loan sharks who never recognized the word mercy when collecting debts. He had felt safe because he still had his corporate salary and his home equity. But now all of that was gone. He had absolutely nothing to pay them with. The terrifying faces of the heavily tattooed loan sharks flashed in his mind, making his entire body shake violently. Bella, please. Help me pay off these sharks. I'll do anything for you. I'll be your servant. I'll disappear from your life forever. Just don't let them catch me. You know who they are, Bella. They'll kill me, Peter whimpered, his voice barely a squeak. He had completely lost every shred of dignity. Isabella stood up and smoothed her pristine outfit. She looked down at Peter with an ice-cold stare, as if looking at a pile of useless garbage. You only feel fear now. Where was all this cowardice when you were repeatedly smashing my face last night? Where was your arrogance when you were screaming at me over a wrinkled collar? You feel so incredibly powerful when facing a defenseless woman. But now you whimper like a coward in front of the people holding the leash on your life. Harrison stepped forward and handed a smartphone to Isabella. She took it and pressed the speakerphone button. Within seconds, a rough, gravelly voice echoed from the other end of the line. The voice dripped with a very real threat that made the hair on the back of Peter's neck stand up. Hello, Miss Isabella. Is our guy with you right now? We've run out of patience, waiting for his past due payments. My boys are already in the lobby of the building, just waiting for your green light to come up and collect him, the man on the phone said. Isabella looked at Peter, who was turning pale as a ghost. Cold sweat poured down his forehead. He shook his head frantically, begging her not to hand him over, but Isabella just stared at him blankly. She brought the phone closer to her mouth. He's right here. You can do whatever you deem necessary to collect what belongs to you. I no longer have any ties to this man. He is not my husband. He is not my family. He is just a stranger trespassing in my brother's property, Isabella answered firmly, without a single note of hesitation. Peter screamed hysterically and tried to lunge forward to grab Isabella, but Harrison's two guards expertly slammed his shoulders back onto the floor. Isabella hung up the phone and handed it back to Harrison. She walked toward the door with confident strides. Before leaving, she paused without looking back. "Enjoy your hard times, Peter. This is the price you pay for every tear and every ounce of pain you ever caused me. Don't ever expect a miracle to come save you," Isabella said, her voice serene but utterly lethal. Isabella and Harrison stepped out of the condo, followed by their guards. They shut the door tightly, leaving Peter alone in a suffocating silence. Not long after, heavy footsteps echoed rapidly down the hallway. The sound of the front door being violently kicked open blasted through the condo. Peter could only curl into a ball in the corner, covering his ears and squeezing his eyes shut, as several massive men with terrifying faces stormed into the room. Peter's life, once filled with luxury and arrogance, had truly transformed into a bottomless hell, exactly as Isabella had masterfully engineered. The following days dragged on like an endless reel of torture for Peter. The brutal beating he received from the loan sharks inside Mia's condo left him in agonizing pain that shot relentlessly through his entire body. The mobsters didn't end his life. Instead, they intentionally kept him alive in agony, so he could feel his destruction slowly, second by second. After beating him to a pulp, the debt collectors stripped him of any remaining valuables. They ripped the Rolex off his wrist, stole his expensive leather Oxfords, and even tore the designer jacket off his back. Once they were satisfied, they threw him out onto the unforgiving asphalt of the city streets, leaving him like a pile of discarded trash. Now Peter was forced to wander the city concrete completely barefoot. His feet, accustomed to expensive shoes, were severely blistered by the scorching afternoon pavement and pierced by sharp debris at night. Severe hunger gnawed at his stomach mercilessly, growling loudly and embarrassingly in crowded areas. His stomach cramped violently, begging for decent food. After days of surviving by drinking filthy tap water from public park restrooms, his energy plummeted drastically. His vision frequently blurred and blacked out. Every time he tried to close his eyes to rest on a bus bench or outside closed storefronts, memories of his past luxury haunted and tortured what was left of his sanity. He remembered the hot meals Isabella always had waiting on the table, the plush mattress in his master bedroom, and the fake respect he commanded from his subordinates at the office. All of it was gone, leaving nothing behind but the disgusted glares of pedestrians passing him by. People would instinctively cover their noses when they walked near him, treating him like a filthy, disease-ridden vagrant. Not a single hand reached out to offer him a dime. Peter truly experienced the rock bottom of human existence, something he had never fathomed. Driven by desperation that was eating away at his logic, Peter suddenly remembered an old college buddy he used to treat to expensive dinners and drinks. That friend had once sworn he would always be there for Peter no matter what. As a token of gratitude, mustering the final scraps of strength hiding in his trembling leg muscles, Peter dragged himself for miles across the sprawling suburbs to his friend's house. The late afternoon sun was blistering, burning his dirty, bruised skin. The thirst choking his throat made every breath agonizing. When he finally reached the iron gates of his friend's suburban driveway, Peter gripped the bars tightly to keep himself from collapsing. He yelled with his pathetic, raspy voice, calling his friend's name over and over, ignoring the strange looks from the neighbors. The wooden front door slowly opened, revealing his friend, whose eyes widened in absolute shock at the sight of Peter looking like a walking corpse. Peter tried to force the corners of his lips up to form a smile, holding out immense hope that he would at least get a glass of clean water and a place to crash. But Peter's weak smile instantly vanished when he saw his friend's face turn ghost white with sheer terror. His buddy quickly took a step back and gripped the inside door handle, looking as if he were ready to slam the door shut to protect himself from whatever danger Peter brought. Confused, Peter pressed his body against the gate. "Help me, man. Just let me lay low here tonight. My whole body is broken. I haven't eaten in days and I really need your help," Peter pleaded. His voice pathetic as his weak hands reached through the iron bars. "Get the hell away from here, Peter. Don't you ever come to my house again. I don't want any part of whatever federal mess a fugitive like you is," his friend yelled, his voice shaking with panic. "Fugitive? What do you mean, fugitive? I'm just having family issues with my wife and some debt problems." "I'm not a criminal," Peter replied, totally lost. "Stop playing dumb. It's all over the news. Everyone knows you're wanted by the feds for running a massive interstate drug trafficking ring. They say the DEA has an airtight case against you. I am not letting my wife and kids get dragged into a federal indictment just for harboring you. The friend screamed before violently slamming the front door shut, leaving Peter standing frozen outside the gate, absorbing the crushing rejection. Peter felt the earth beneath him collapse. Those terrifying federal drug charges had to be a vicious frame-up orchestrated by Harrison to completely annihilate any chance of Peter finding help out there. Isabella and her brother had truly engineered his absolute ruin, systematically refusing to leave even the tiniest gap for Peter to breathe or seek legal counsel. Peter turned around and staggered away from the suburban neighborhood, his eyes hollow. The bright afternoon sky rapidly morphed into pitch black. Thick storm clouds gathered quickly over the city skyline, followed by rolling thunder that created an ominous atmosphere. Shortly after the first crack of thunder, a torrential downpour unleashed upon the earth without mercy. The heavy freezing rain hit his scalp hard, slowly piercing down into his fragile bones. Peter shivered violently. His teeth chattered as the freezing cold threatened his life. He was forced to curl up under a large oak tree by the sidewalk, hugging his knees, even though the leaves did absolutely nothing to shield him from the violent storm. In that lethal cold and profound spiritual isolation, Peter's emotional defenses shattered completely. He wept uncontrollably, his tears mixing with the rain washing over his face. He howled like a lost child who couldn't find his way home. "Help me, Mom. I'm so cold. I have no one left," Peter whimpered over the deafening roar of the storm. Memories of his childhood flashed by, reminding him of a mother who always hugged and defended him. But she had passed away long ago, and there was no divine intervention coming from the heavens to save him from the wrath of the people he had abused. Pushed by physical pain that exceeded normal human endurance and a sanity heavily eroded by despair, Peter forced his body to stand up. He dragged his feet through the storm, aiming for the only place he knew was the epicenter of his current agony. He gathered the last remnants of his mind to walk toward Isabella's family's massive estate. He didn't know where he found the strength to walk that far in a severe thunderstorm. But his absolute despair seemed to have completely stripped him of his pride. In his head, he planned to drop to his knees in the mud, kiss Isabella's feet through his tears, and beg for her to just end his life that night rather than forcing him to endure this insane, uncertain torture. After walking for hours through the brutal weather, Peter finally arrived, panting heavily, in front of the colossal wrought iron gates guarding his wife's family estate. The perimeter walls towered high, wrapped in solid stone that screamed limitless power. Peter let his body fall, his knees slamming onto the hard asphalt right in front of the heavy iron gates. He tilted his head up to the sky, letting the rain wash the dried blood and grime off his face. "Isabella. Come out here, Isabella. Forgive me, I'm begging you. Just kill me right now if it satisfies you. I can't live like this anymore," Peter screamed with every ounce of vocal strength he had left. His screams were heart-wrenching, full of regret. But his voice was drowned out by the howling wind and deafening rain. Peter kept screaming his wife's name until his throat was raw and bleeding. But the giant steel gates remained tightly shut. Not a single security guard walked out to chase him away. It was as if his arrival had been predicted, anticipated, and intentionally ignored as part of the final act. Suddenly, just as Peter dropped his head to the ground because he had lost his voice entirely, a loud mechanical hum echoed from the top of the perimeter wall. A blindingly bright light suddenly pierced through the heavy rain, pointing directly at the asphalt where Peter was kneeling. Peter snapped his head up in utter confusion. He raised a hand to shield his eyes from the massive spotlight burning his retinas. But instead of seeing Isabella walking out the gates to grant him heroic forgiveness, Peter was treated to a masterpiece of vengeance that made his heart stop dead. A massive LED screen mounted high on the gates had been switched on. It was preparing to broadcast a brand new nightmare far more terrifying than starvation or street beatings. The brilliantly lit screen began playing crystal-clear video footage. Slicing through the dark, rainy night, Peter squinted his burning eyes, trying to recognize the setting on the screen. His heart hammered wildly against his ribs when he realized the room shown was his own former living room. The video was recorded from a hidden top-down angle. It proved that a hidden camera had been installed without his knowledge the entire time. Peter swallowed hard. His body tensed, waiting for whatever horrific scene was about to play. Within seconds, the video clearly showed the events of his last night at home. There was Peter in his work clothes, standing with a face full of rage, screaming at Isabella, who sat cowering on the floor. The audio from the recording was blasted at maximum volume through outdoor speakers mounted around the elite estate, shattering the neighborhood's silence. Every filthy insult, every degrading slur, and every brutal threat that came out of Peter's mouth could be heard perfectly, as if it were happening live. Peter watched with his own eyes as his on-screen self raised his hand and slapped Isabella so hard her body was thrown across the room. The video didn't stop at one incident. The giant screen played a relentless compilation of physical abuse and mental torture Peter had inflicted upon Isabella throughout their years of marriage. "Stop! Turn it off! Please turn it off!" Peter screamed with a pathetic, croaking voice. His hands grasped at the air. Trying to reach the screen mounted far beyond his reach, Peter covered his face with his hands, feeling utterly disgusted watching his own monstrous acts broadcast like a drive-in movie. But the psychological torture hadn't reached its peak. Suddenly, the giant screen split in two. The left side continued looping the undeniable evidence of his physical abuse. The right side transitioned into a live stream dashboard from multiple social media platforms: Facebook, Instagram, and X. Thousands of comments were scrolling at lightning speed on the right side of the screen. Peter squinted and recognized usernames he knew perfectly well. There were members of his extended family, former colleagues from his old firm, business partners he frequently dealt with, and distant acquaintances who always viewed Peter as a model, God-fearing husband. Every single contact in his network had been forced to witness the ultimate live broadcast of Peter's darkest sins. Every scrolling comment was filled with curses, profanity, and absolute disgust directed at Peter. His extended family publicly disowned him. His friends called him a heartless animal. The stellar reputation, honor, and prominent name he had built with a fake mask for years was bulldozed to the ground in under 5 minutes. There wasn't a single human being left on Earth who would look at his face without spitting on the ground. Peter was socially executed, killed without a weapon, using nothing but the reflection of his own evil deeds. "No, you can't do this to me. This is a violation of my rights, Isabella. You're a demon. You destroyed my entire life," Peter howled, thrashing and violently slamming his bloody fists into the asphalt. His sanity was unraveling thread by thread. He realized he could never rebuild a life now that his true rotten face had been exposed to the entire city. Amidst Peter's frustrated screams piercing the night, the thick iron gates finally slid open with a smooth mechanical hum. From the gap, a line of massive security guards wearing dark rain gear marched out. They formed a barricade, staring at Peter with dead, lethal eyes. Behind the guards stepped the head of Harrison's security detail. The man stood tall, holding a bullhorn. He looked down at Peter with supreme condescension. "Quite the spectacular show, wouldn't you agree, mister?" Peter, the head of security, said through the bullhorn. His tone was flat, but every word stabbed right into Peter's gut. "The madam sends her final regards. She expresses her deepest gratitude because you provided the perfect broadcast material for everyone you know to see. Oh, and one more thing," the security chief added. "We also sent the unedited high-resolution files of this footage to the authorities authorized to lock your filthy body in a cage." Peter stopped pounding the asphalt. His ears suddenly picked up a sound he absolutely did not want to hear. From the distance, cutting through the fading rain, came the wail of police sirens approaching fast. The sirens grew louder and multiplied, indicating it wasn't just one cruiser. Red and blue strobe lights cut through the night fog, sweeping over the empty street until several local police cruisers slammed on their brakes, surrounding Peter right in front of the gates. Multiple uniformed officers sprang from their vehicles. Without wasting time asking questions, 2 cops tackled Peter against the hood of a cruiser, violently twisting his arms behind his back and snapping cold steel handcuffs around his wrists. Peter groaned in pain, trying to resist with whatever strength he had. "Let me go, I'm innocent. My wife set me up. She planned all this. You need to arrest her, not me." Peter screamed, tears of sheer panic streaming down his face. He couldn't stop spouting nonsensical denials to defend himself. One officer pressed Peter's face hard against the wet metal of the cruiser to make him stop thrashing. "Shut your mouth. You have the right to remain silent. We got a domestic violence report backed by airtight video evidence. Not to mention a federal warrant for wire fraud and corporate embezzlement at your old firm. You are out of options tonight, buddy." A few curious neighbors from the upscale community had gathered nearby, holding up their smartphones to record the arrest of the man whose face had just gone viral on the live stream. Insults and curses were hurled by the crowd watching the humiliating spectacle. Camera flashes slapped Peter's face over and over, immortalizing the total destruction of a man who used to worship himself. The officers roughly dragged Peter and shoved him into the back of the caged squad car. The heavy metal door slammed shut, marking the end of Peter's freedom in the outside world and the beginning of a long penance he would suffer behind the cold concrete of a prison cell. The squad car drove off into the night, taking Peter away in disgrace, broken without a single ounce of dignity left to his name. The main courtroom of the State Superior Court felt incredibly frigid. It was as if the AC had been cranked up intentionally to freeze whatever scraps of arrogance Peter still harbored. The heavy, oak-paneled walls surrounding the room stood imposing, creating an intimidating, claustrophobic atmosphere. Peter sat at the defendant's table, trembling constantly. His face was gaunt, his cheekbones jutting out, and deep, dark circles bruised his eyes from the severe lack of sleep in county lockup. The oversized, short-sleeved orange jumpsuit swallowed his frame, proving how much weight he had rapidly lost. He kept his head bowed, unable to meet the glaring, judgmental eyes of the gallery packed behind him. Right across the aisle at the plaintiff's table, Isabella sat with flawless posture and regal authority. She wore a tailored, high-end designer pantsuit that exuded power and grace. Her appearance radiated extraordinary calm, a stark contrast to her pathetic ex-husband. Sitting beside Isabella was a silver-haired man, the most expensive, ruthlessly feared corporate defense attorney in the state, hired personally by Harrison to guarantee Peter would never see the light of day again. Meanwhile, Peter was represented by an overworked young public defender who had looked completely defeated since day one, overwhelmed by the mountain of evidence Isabella's team had submitted. The presiding judge banged his wooden gavel, hard demanding order in the court after the prosecution finished reading the charges. Peter was given his final chance to offer a defense before sentencing. Peter forced his weak legs to stand. He gripped the edge of the wooden table so hard his knuckles turned white, trying to keep himself from collapsing. With a hoarse, raspy voice dripping with crocodile tears, Peter spun a new web of lies, begging the judge for mercy. "Your Honor, I beg for your leniency. I admit, I raised my hand to my wife. But it didn't happen in a vacuum, Your Honor. I was provoked. She was a disobedient wife who neglected her household duties and was secretly plotting my ruin with another man. I'm just a normal, hardworking husband who came home exhausted and lost control because I was constantly pushed over the edge. She orchestrated that corporate fraud to frame me, Peter." Pleaded in a forced, high-pitched whine. He tried to twist the facts, painting himself as the victim of a malicious conspiracy. Hearing this absurd fiction, Isabella's high-priced attorney didn't even look surprised. The older man stood up smoothly, adjusted his glasses, and glared sharply at Peter before turning his attention to the judge's bench. He walked forward holding a small flash drive. "Objection, Your Honor. What the defendant just stated is a blatant, shameful perjury, lacking a shred of evidentiary support. The defendant is attempting to hide behind false accusations to cover up his deeply ingrained brutality. The prosecution requests permission to exhibit a fraction of the verified security footage to directly impeach the defendant's fabricated testimony," the attorney stated in an authoritative, undeniable tone. Following the judge's nod of approval, a large monitor on the courtroom wall lit up. Crystal-clear video played for everyone in the room. The footage showed the night before Peter was evicted. It clearly showed Isabella quietly folding laundry without saying a word. Then, Peter stormed in with a furious expression, yanked the neatly folded shirt, and immediately slapped Isabella with full force, sending her crashing into the hardwood floor. Subsequent blows rained down relentlessly, accompanied by Peter's vile cursing over a slightly wrinkled collar. The video played uninterrupted for several minutes, projecting raw terror throughout the courtroom. The attorney paused the footage and turned back to the judge. "This audiovisual evidence proves the defendant viciously assaulted his wife over folded laundry. There was no provocation. There was no prior argument. It is purely unadulterated brutality and a desire to harm a weaker individual. This evidence, compounded by the irrefutable paper trail of his corporate embezzlement, is more than sufficient to warrant the maximum allowable sentence." The judge let out a long sigh and began reading the final verdict with a booming voice. All elements of the crimes charged against Peter had been proven beyond a reasonable doubt. The judge sentenced Peter to the maximum possible time in a maximum security state penitentiary without the possibility of parole and ordered him to pay a staggering amount of financial restitution, a debt that guaranteed Peter would live in absolute poverty for the rest of his natural life. Hearing the strike of the gavel closing the trial, Peter's mind snapped completely. He screamed hysterically like a wounded wild animal. In insane desperation, Peter vaulted over the defense table, lunging toward Isabella. But before his fingers could even brush her blazer, 3 heavily built bailiffs tackled him mid-air, slamming him violently onto the courtroom floor. The sickening crack of a fracturing rib echoed in the room. Peter was dragged out of the courtroom like a sack of garbage, followed by Isabella's cold stare ensuring that justice had been flawlessly executed. The atmosphere inside the maximum security penitentiary was bleak, suffocating, and reeked of rusting iron mixed with sweat. Sunlight barely penetrated the tiny grated windows set high up in the thick concrete walls. Peter sat, curled up, hugging his knees in the darkest corner of his cramped cell. The concrete floor beneath him was freezing, and damp leaching away whatever warmth was left in his emaciated body. In that tiny box, he shared a cell with 5 other inmates, men who were massive, savage, and deeply feared. His past life of luxuriant food and absolute corporate power now felt like a fever dream he could never touch again. As a fresh inmate, convicted of beating a woman and white-collar fraud, Peter was instantly shoved to the very bottom of the prison food chain. He had no protection, no commissary money to bribe anyone, and zero physical strength to defend himself. Every day was a battle for survival, against inmates who used him to relieve their boredom. The broken rib he suffered in the courtroom had not healed properly, yet he was forced into brutal manual labor. His meal trays were constantly stolen, forcing him to endure agonizing hunger through the night. A heavy-set inmate covered in terrifying gang tattoos walked up to Peter holding a filthy, soaking wet mop head. The man threw the mop directly at Peter's face, the dirty water soaking into his orange jumpsuit. Peter flinched, staring at the man with a violently trembling body. Fear instantly paralyzed his vocal cords. "Scrub this floor right now until I can eat off it, or you're gonna find out exactly how bad today can get for you," the tattooed man barked with a gravelly, threatening voice. He then raised his heavy boot and kicked Peter hard in the shin, delivering a painful warning that made Peter whimper in agony. "Yes, sir. I'll clean it right now," Peter stammered, his voice shaking. Tears of absolute regret fell down his cheeks as he bent down to grab the filthy mop, scrubbing the cell floor on his hands and knees in a pathetic display of submission. With every trembling wipe, the memory of how he used to casually bark orders at Isabella tortured his soul. This was his ultimate punishment. An endless loop of suffering that was the exact fitting price for the cruelty he had sowed. The trumpet of his freedom had been silenced, leaving him in an iron cage built of his own sins. On the other side of the city at that exact moment, the atmosphere was a stark contrast to Peter's living hell. The morning breeze blew crisply, bringing fresh air that gently caressed the skin. Isabella stood on the open-air balcony of a breathtaking Manhattan penthouse, the corporate headquarters of her family's empire. The room behind her was decorated with true, elegant luxury, far from anything gaudy or ostentatious. Isabella held a delicate ceramic cup of artisanal Earl Grey tea, the hot steam carrying a calming aroma. The bruises and swelling on her face were completely gone, leaving no trace behind. Her presence now radiated the absolute power of a corporate queen who had successfully risen from the ashes of destruction. Harrison stepped out onto the balcony, walking calmly toward his sister. He stood beside her, looking out over the sprawling city skyline from the incredible height. Harrison crossed his arms, observing his sister's face, which looked significantly brighter and more alive than it had in years. The crushing weight that had pressed down on Isabella's shoulders was entirely gone. The legal proceedings are fully wrapped up. He's been placed in the hardest block in max security. We've also ensured his outside debts will be waiting to greet him if he ever figures out a way out, Harrison said, his voice full of care breaking the morning silence. Everything played out exactly according to your master plan. How do you feel now? Isabella slowly raised her ceramic cup, took a delicate sip of the warm tea and lowered it. She stared straight out at the horizon in the east, where the sun was rising, casting a golden glow that warmed the city. A faint, peaceful, and profoundly relieved smile perfectly curved on her lips. "I can finally breathe, Harry." "The pain is gone," Isabella said, her voice serene but backed by unshakable conviction. "Justice was truly served today. Now it's time I take the wheel of my own life." The sun continued to climb, illuminating Isabella's new path toward a future entirely under her control, leaving her dark past buried forever alongside the screams of regret echoing in a dark prison cell.